Well, that was crazy. I just did a full restart a minute before doing something. I'm like, I got a blue screen. My stuff's not blue. That was going to be creative in a minute. All right. So, wow. Thanks for all coming. Let's just get going because I think I'm going to run pretty tight. There's a seat up at the front. Okay. Awesome. All right. Hey, y'all. My name is Dean. And I come from South Carolina, which I can't believe I'm about to say is up north. Normally I have to tell people where it is, like, we're the Carolina below North Carolina. The Carolina you don't really hear about. That's where we are. This is me on Twitter. I'm going to show this again later. The important thing about this is that instead of giving you handouts or notes or anything like that, I have pre-tweeted a bunch of stuff that I think is great for the reading that will be a good add-on to what we're doing here today. So you can just check that out when you like. I am owner of a company called TrueMatter. Ta-da! And what we do is UX. That's it. All right, we do UX stem to stern. We are doing discovery, we're doing definition, we're doing design all the way up through front end, sometimes a little bit more. Sometimes all we do is test things or we evaluate things, and that's expert review of usability, accessibility, and et cetera. And we do a whole bunch of stuff with Progress Tools. Today we're talking about bringing and building UX into the dev process. How many devs do we have here? Yeah, because we can't do a damn thing without you. UX folks, got some UX folks? All right, we got some, great, awesome. Okay, so we're gonna have a good time today. I'm gonna hopefully get through this fairly quickly. We're gonna start here. Most of the time when people say the word UX, and we hear it a lot, right? We hear it at Progress all the time. And I remember I was here last year, we hear it all the time. It's user experience this, customer experience this, all this stuff we hear. And sometimes I wonder what the heck it means. And usually, I'm sure present company completely accepted. When I talk to development groups, they're saying UX. What they mean is the tip of the iceberg, right? The whole iceberg here is our digital product. The tippy top part that we see above the water, that's the stuff we see. That's our interface. That's what we're actually doing stuff with. That's visual. But the UX is the whole part of the iceberg you don't see. It's all the planning, it's all the strategy, it's all the structure, it's all the thought, it's all the user interaction that went into making this thing. So that's the premise of the discussion today. We want to build UX into a dev process. We're talking about this when we talk about UX. We're talking about a holistic view of what makes a digital product better. Because when I talk about what I do and I say it's UX, I say we exist to make digital products easier to use. That's it. And one day I finally explained this to my mom, who's 75, because she didn't just I work in computers. She has no idea what I do. And I said, well, did you ever get really mad when you're trying to do something? Just, son of a, 75-year-old woman swearing mad. Yes, she says, like we all say when we're using some kind of digital product that makes us mad. It's it's my job to make that go away. And then she understood what I did. I was like, wow, all right. So I want to start by addressing why we don't make digital products that are good. Because for a conference that talks a lot about experience, I still look at most digital products and I'm like, that's kind of terrible. It's a letdown. It's really bad. So I did a lot of thinking about why this happens. Many of you are probably familiar with the Greek myth of Sisyphus. All right? So there's this lovely little boulder at the bottom of the hill, and it's our job to roll it up to the top. It also happens to be our job to roll it up to the top every single day because it comes back down. And I thought, what if that was kind of us? We make digital products, and particularly development teams. They've got a lot on their mind. They've got to figure out a ton of stuff. It's got to all be right. You're never going to get credit for all the stuff that goes right. You just get pounded on for the one or two things that go wrong, all that sort of stuff. It's tough to do. It's difficult to get it right. And so what we do all the time is we try to figure out a better way to do it because it's so hard to get things done. So we're smart, so we rig up a different way to bring the boulder up the hill. I call this agile. And notice it's about to fray and not work, so it's a good metaphor. Other people try to do things like, you know what would be better, what would make this digital product better, is if it were prettier. And I heard this today. Just forget that it's like, we laugh, but I heard it today. It's just an instinct we have as developers to say making something look nicer means something got better. It just means your boulder looks nice. You still got to roll it up the hill and it's still coming back down. Another thing we do, particularly as developers and development teams, is we tend to say, this thing is what it is, so this is how you have to use it right, user, and this is the training you'll have to have in order to use it right. So just the training and you'll be fine. But we still have to do this. We're not addressing the real problem. The real problem, of course, is that Sisyphus really, really got on Zeus's bad side, and Zeus punished him to make him do this. The real problem is maybe Sisyphus should apologize to Zeus, and everything would be fine. It wouldn't have to roll the ball the way it is. But all that Sisyphus can focus on is how to get the boulder up to the top, and that's kind of us. It's always back down at the end of the day. At least, I remember early in my career feeling this way a lot. I got to do this again, and it's just not going to work. Nothing I do is working. So I'm about to tell you about a bunch of stuff today. I've made all these things. I say, do these the right way. That's because I've made all the mistakes on the opposite side. Developers and designers often have this problem. And I'm using the word designer carefully. I really mean today UX professionals. The word UX pro is something that it means a zillion things to a zillion people. I'm talking about someone who does the thinking to sort out how some person actually gets done what they need to get done with a digital product. Right? That may make them an artist, probably not. I'm assuming that person has a unique skill set. So we'll talk about that again, but we used to have a problem in our shop where the UX pros and the developers would argue a little bit about what was going on in an app. And I'm not saying it always turned into a dumpster brawl, but we had heated debates about what went right with a digital product or what to do, and your idea for functionality is not usable, and you want to do something that can't be done, and stuff like this. So we have all these problems, and these of course a real developer, and it's a problem. And we talked about it earlier. If you were in the earlier session, which was excellent, by the way, on Unite UX, and I'm going to actually touch on that in a little bit because I was really excited about hearing about that. Developers and UX pros, they tend to have different ways of talking about the same thing. Developers are a lot like this, okay? So if this is sort of you in a cliched way, and all these things are good, by the way, they're all excellent, but that's basically how developers see the world. And when we look at UX professionals, now keep in mind, I'm not talking about visual people necessarily. I'm talking about the people, we're making wireframes, we're making sitemaps, we're figuring out functionality, we're talking to users. They're kind of seeing the world this way. They're thinking people, not systems, right? Behavior, not function. They're the two sides of the exact same thing, mind you. It's just how these two people approach it. Because we approach it differently, it took us forever to figure out how to do it well together. It wasn't always easy. So we know that great things can be made, though. Because we see them all the time. If you've used Airbnb, it's one of my favorite things in the world. It's a great thing. It's a great site. It's a great app. The experience is phenomenal. It's, integrates with all this sort of stuff that's easy in my life. I text people, call them. It's great. I love the app. It's fantastic. In order to get here, a lot of people with these different skill sets had to work together extremely effectively, extremely well. And they had to collaborate well. So user experience, this notion of that, has to be part of that development process to get this. Or else you're going to get a lot of that stuff that when you look at, and I know stuff, you think about stuff in your mind now that's it falls short, it could have been better. It's hard to use, all that. That's not what we see with Airbnb, and there's a reason. Okay. Now, you have probably one of two ways to go in your organization. Either you've got these people or you don't, all right? I'm going to assume at first that you have access to these people, to UX professionals, either on your team or in your company, and you can get them and talk to them. I promise I'll get to the point where if you don't, what do you do? Okay, that's next. But first, let's imagine they're there, right? Because once they get there at some point, this is how it'll work. Okay, so integrating UX into a dev process. First, the question is, when do you do it? So imagine this is your process. How am I doing so far, right? You have a beginning and you have an end. And when I think of things like UX, which has to do with planning and has to do with talking to users and discovery, I tend to think, it happens near the beginning. Kind of has to, because we're deciding, well, what is this and what do people want? And how do they use stuff? Okay, fine. Dev. Now, I know you might have an answer you want me to show, and I don't know what it's like for your organization, but I know no matter where it starts, it definitely ends over there. Because the biggest complaint that we always got from our developers is, damn you, and pushing everything on me at the end. Right? Always, 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 always. And so the obvious answer to that should be coming up. But let's look at both people working together. Now, there was probably a gap in the middle, but I think UX and dev should be working together the whole way. And it's totally possible. And I assure you they did it for great apps like Airbnb. I know because I know the people who made it. Okay. We want to go and do things beginning, middle, and end. So far, so good. All right. So that means that you have to start early together. Now, in some cases, it's also a frequent complaint of developers. I'm never in the beginning. I'm never when they're sorting things out, when they're starting to figure out requirements. This stuff is thrown down upon me, and now I've got to deal with it, and it's already stupid before I started. Right? That's a common complaint. It's not necessarily wrong. So if you're fortunate enough to be in an organization where as development professionals, you get to do things earlier, right, in a process, that's good. If not, you do need to get there. But now imagine integrating UX into the process. You want to start early and be collaborating with UX people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the pieces, parts of that in a minute. Okay. Another thing you need to do is forget about what you think about as development-only activities or UX-only activities. So say I was doing a user test, or I'm just going to observe users and see what it is they do and how they do it. Of course, a UX person is going to want to be there and going to want to be a part of understanding users that way. But if I'm a developer on that project, I want in. I want to be there. I want to watch the users try to do something. Either it's a current system or it's a prototype. I want to see them struggle and where they struggle because I have my own eyes. Someone's going to make a report, but I'm going to believe my own eyes and I'm going to see it right then and there. I guarantee you there's no sacred cow you have in development that can survive watching a user have trouble with it. You'll be the first one to say, I'm just going to change it because you saw it. So you need to be there, even if you're just observing. That's step one. You want to, in bringing UX in the process, I'm actually describing development reaching back to the beginning of the process and doing UX things. So even if you're not involved in definition early enough, part of your process should be to find out what UX activities are doing and go be there and do them. That alone is a good start, a very good start. Okay, I also want you to think a little bit differently about how you create requirements for a digital product. So we have business requirements, right? This is strategy, that sort of thing. We know about that. And we have functional requirements, which is, what it does. It does this, period, right? This is what this thing does. And typically these sorts of requirements are coming from these types of people. A mix of them, it depends, air quotes, mine, okay? But they're not necessarily coming from certain sources. Certainly not UX professionals are necessarily users. Sometimes what we think is user input is just, stakeholder opinion or what we think the user wants or a user story, right? But we get a lot of requirements this way. And I'm simplifying for the sake of argument in the room today. There's the business, there's technology, and we're working together to make requirements for a thing. That tends to be how most organizations we talk to, that's how they do it. Even if they say they do it other ways, this is basically what they're doing. Okay, that's fine. Hold that thought for a minute. Because if you have a process by which you are creating a digital product for a specific user and you're not necessarily engaging that user, or you don't have a full collaborative team, this is what I mean when I say most products aren't good. You say, I've made you the glorious widget. And I imagine the dude here on the right saying, this is great. It's just sort of what I never wanted. What you need to add are UX requirements, which describe how a person interacts with a thing. That's it at its base level. Hold it for later because I'm concerned that I can make this happen in enough time. Unless we bar that door. Okay. UX requirements come from people. Always come from people. How they interact with the product. Now, the key thing I want you to remember in bringing this part into your process is something that most people do all the time, but I want you to never do again. You can't ask users what they want because I'm not going to call them stupid. What's a better way to phrase it more diplomatically? They don't know what they want. And they cannot phrase to you how to do it because they're not you. They're not professionals. They do the best they can. And when it comes to visuals, because everyone's an artist, right? They say, well, I just don't think this should be blue at all, do you? Everyone's an artist, so they get to have an opinion about art, but they do that in dev, right? But they're not being evil. They just don't know any better. And they're just doing their best to give you an opinion based on some frame of reference they could offer. Okay? But you can't listen to them. You can observe them. You can watch what they do and you can test them because that's real. Watching someone do something is real. Hearing their opinion, no bueno. It's not going to work. So you need to observe people using a current product, a prototype, whatever. Watch them do stuff. Just be quiet, be a scientist, watch them. This is what UX people do. I guarantee you, if you come in there as developers, first of all, you would freak the UX person out. You want to be there? Yeah, let's go. Let's do this. They want you there. So when you volunteer to go there, they will like it. I guarantee you. I would early in my career, I would have just begged for developers to be in those sessions with me. It would have saved me a zillion hours of time explaining things. Okay. We're also going to suggest that we think about users in our product. This is a UX staple. We think about users as the genesis of our product decisions. Now, UX people make things called personas. Hold that for a second, because there's other things we make in the industry from a development perspective that are very similar. But personas are something that happens in the UX world. They're very good things. We just figure out what people want to do, why they want to do it, what gets in the way, what are the steps that they need to take to get something done. And then as you build that, you're figuring out how they can use a product. We actually take the next step of having users make that for us. We don't try to guess at what they've said. We actually have them do that. We lead them through activities to help them produce their own personas. It gives us a very clear idea. If you have a bunch of people in a room who are, 50 plus and new to online banking, well, they should make their own persona. I don't need to guess at what they have to do, right? And it's more powerful when they do. And it leads us to create a sense of who's doing what. And it always leads to actions. All right, so this is a UX way to do things that probably seems at least vaguely familiar to you based on some of the ways you might engage users already. UX people do it this way. No problem, okay? Hold that thought, because then it won't be weird to you. UX people use these words. I just showed you a persona, they create these scenarios, they have tasks, and they test them, and it's great. They're very similar to terms used in development, all right? We're actually using similar types of words, and even in some cases, fairly similar deliverables to do the same thing. They come from a different perspective. So when you're working with a UX person, you can say, you're doing personas. I know what those are. That's kind of like when I talk about what my end user is. Let's see if we can compare notes about how that functionality's got to work. And then suddenly you're making better things together. And I've seen that happen a ton. Okay. We also, in order to build UX into a process, we have to go from users to how it connects with objectives. So the beautiful thing about what a UX person does is kind of bridges that gap from strategy to implementation. So if you're hanging out with the UX people and you're making that part of your process, you're getting yourself closer to strategy, even if the powers that be say, no, that's not for you. Sort of like a backdoor way to start getting more solid user sense to your product. So what we do is we take all these user inputs and we create objectives from a user perspective always. That's what we do. And we build this into early discussions of functionality, which is always informed by a developer. We're never just sort of like, because the worst thing in the world you could do is have some UX person like just make up some functionality. Yeah, let's do that. And then the developer looks at it and goes, are you just like, are you crazy? I mean, that defies the laws of physics. We can't do that. We build this into a roadmap. So when we're thinking about UX, we're always thinking about definition that starts feeding an implementation process. These are not really foreign concepts. If development is brought earlier into the process, chooses to collaborate with UX, really good things are just going to start to happen just from doing that, alone. And if you've had a chance to collaborate strongly between development and UX, you've probably already seen that happen. And of course, our roadmap is just a big old crazy document. Okay. So, and I realize I'm simplifying. We've got the business, we've got technology. We were missing something, all right? We were missing a UX input to requirements, all right? And I'm going to show you how we do that in a minute. But if you think of these three things as a core to any set of digital product requirements, you are bringing UX into your process. Now, there's more people here who should be involved. I'm just being simplistic for today because we don't have time. But I'm not even talking about, content strategy and, microcopy interactions and things like this that are hugely important. But let's stop there because most development shops just stop at the first two, and that's a big source of their problems. Okay. Yay, we're doing great on time. All right. Another thing I want you to do is, this is a mind change that I hope you're already taken steps to make, but it bears repeating. Function and form are not separate things. They're truly the same thing. They couldn't be more the same. Imagine, and I can prove it to you, imagine someone designs a beautiful seat for a sports car. There's just no way in the world that an engineer made a seat and then told a designer, make this beautiful. I mean, let alone the car, right? I mean, there's no way you make a car like that, let alone a seat. Same is true for software. It's crazy for us to do software the way most people do it, which is to engineer it and then decide to add other things into it. It's just, on its face, completely unworkable. So UX, you could put anything on the something. I'm calling it UX today. It could be design. It's not something added to functionality. That's crazy. All right. In fact, even to pick on business analysts, there's when we first talk to business analysts who are not used, we do a class like this for them too. When they're not used to talking to UX people, they have their sense of who users are is not very awesome. very functional, very internal. All right, so part of making UX part of your process is starting to think a little differently and bring the users in earlier. Okay, we're doing good. 25 minutes, we're rocking and rolling. We can do this. Okay, now here's where it gets fun, because now we're into a stage that is really probably more comfortable for all of us. We're doing stuff. We're making stuff. It's sketching, it's wireframes, it's prototypes, and we're getting into iterative cycles. So, what I'm describing to you works for waterfall, for crying out loud, but certainly for any way you implement Agile, right? So imagine we're doing a bunch of this stuff. They could be low fidelity sketches, right? If I'm sketching something, I assure you, this sketch had a developer present in the room when it was being sketched, and that developer was contributing to what was going on here. That doesn't mean the person has to be an artist. The artist person sketched it. All right. And then when we get into wireframes, we use, the tool we use is Axure, which is why I was very excited to hear that word. But we use XD and Sketch. We use those things. But a UX person is working on this because it's structure, it's logic, it has to do with tasks. We have a designer already working in the wireframe to try to start moving it into the direction that it needs to go. The words are correct, or at least maybe not in this screenshot, but we get a content strategist in there. We're making the words right. So we can see something that's more and more real. We turn it into a prototype, and we could actually test it. And the whole time, developer is working with us on this, one or more developers, depending on the project. And we start with our wireframes getting requirement notes directly embedded into the wireframes. We can turn them on and off. Sometimes they lead to other documents, but we're talking requirements very early. This thing's a widget. It's going to do this. It's going to refer back to this. We've got to think about that earlier, or design can't go right. A designer will try something later, and the developer will you're killing me, man. I can't reuse this. Well, wouldn't it have been nice if you had been talking earlier, right? So this is where the rubber hits the road. It is actually the fun part of collaboration. It's the easiest part to understand. We kind of inherently know how to do this. So if you're putting the other stuff in front of it and bringing that into your process, this is better by the time you get to this. Okay, and we do a bunch of these. And we refer to more formal documentation as well. And it will make beautiful products like this, which has just done a killing for Regency. They're a national firm headquartered in Jacksonville, done super well. This is the wireframe built out into actual functionality. Built on Sitefinity, did some, I can't remember if we did any Kendo UI in parts of it. But it works great, and it's gone gangbusters for the client. So if you are doing this sort of iterative process, I don't really care what you call it, agile, sprints, or you call it whatever you want, agile, iterative, fine. You're doing it together because these things live together in harmony. If there ever is a time in your project when, as a developer, you're unsure of what's happening with user experience, that's a great signal that you're not talking enough to the UX person. Okay, it's as simple as that. You need to be talking all the time. Now, when we're in an iterative process, these are a bunch of the people who are doing stuff, okay? And mostly in development firms, it's the people on the top doing stuff. I mean, sometimes you don't even get to the stakeholders, clients. Actually, they don't even get to interface designers most of the time with a lot of companies we work with. But as you go down further and further, you get more and more quality to a digital product. So we want these people in that agile process as things being developed. And this is, I will say, the same thing is true for UX people as for dev. In dev, you need to constantly pull yourself earlier into the process. And UX people need to constantly push themselves farther out into the process. So as things are, even in testing, they're there. They're constantly looking at it. They're checking in on it. If you ever have a point where one part of the equation is not a permanent part of the collaboration, you are careening toward trouble. And I'm sure you've probably seen this. We certainly have. Iterative process, standard stuff. When you're in the middle here, that's where all the action happens. This is actually a good book I just recently read about design sprints with Google Style. I encourage you to read it. It's relatively new, 2016. It sort of builds upon this idea of a design thinking way of thinking about Agile. And I actually didn't tweet that out. I should have, but you ought to read that. Okay, a couple more things. We're doing great. We're going to make it. I want you to test products more with users. I'm not talking about QA testing. When you're making products like software, this tends to be an easier thing to think about because you're building things that people have to use. Like if I'm thinking about Unite UX, I'm thinking about, you're going to have working with people a ton as you bring that through alpha and beta. I got to tell you, if you weren't in the Unite UX thing this morning, it was like, I got to Google that and check that out. That's very promising. So we want to test work with users. This is a beautiful thing. All right. As engineers, we understand implicitly that this is a possibility every time we do something. UX people, designers, content people, they think this is horrible. But if they could take a page from our book and say, not working, that's excellent. Then I know something. You can help them and say failure is a very good thing. When we do testing, there's an example of some of the reports we do. We bring people, this is a report for testing of an existing product. We'll test and track scenarios and what people did and try to identify things to do now, way later, strategic direction as well. So we do an awful lot of testing that leads to a lot of good empirical results about design. You can judge design empirically, test it. And I don't think enough people do this. You should be user testing more. That's a way to bring dev and UX people together again later in the process, after launch. You can do this at all sorts of phases. I got to tell you, you will change your life. Attending a user test will change your life as a developer. You'll never be the same again in a very good way. You've got to be there. Okay. When most people do serious digital products, the UX people, they do their work and they slowly leave the scene until we get into development. Now the adults are working, and we're getting this thing done and we're implementing, we're getting into testing. And an early problem we had when we interacted with clients is we assumed they would ask us to come back in when they needed us, forgetting that we were talking to people who had been developers in development firm their whole lives, never trained or had an instinct to ask to make sure UX kept in the flow to the end. I mean, the bitter launch it, production end. When we finally realized, we need to be the people to make sure this happens, changed our life as a company and how we help people through. So now we call it the UX holdback. You have to have a part of your budget that's for UX that stays to the end. And it's got to be more than you think because you need that collaboration all the way through. It sort of seems obvious when I say it, but we had to discover it. And I assure you it's true. So just like developers, again, you need to bring yourself further up into the process. UX people, keep projecting yourself out to the end of the process and work together the whole way. We sent this to our client once and said, you need emergency UX reserves. Okay, you should be, of course, including UX pros and QA testing. I think that sounds simple, but we had to discover that one too, because they'll see things you won't. Okay, whew. Almost done. Now, what if you don't have UX people, right? Because that's the other boat everyone's in. Well, I don't have UX people, and I'm not going to hire UX people, and I got to do everything, and I'm not a UI guy, I mean, we hear that a lot. So I wish I had better news for you, but I have one big thing that you can do. You're not in a position, if you don't have UX resources, you're not in a position to just sort of wait for them usually, because chances are leadership's not just waiting to press the button to hire all those people. it probably means they're in no hurry to even think about it. So you need to do some of the things I've described earlier on your own in guerrilla fashion right now. You have to start integrating UX into your life as a developer. And in so doing, I guarantee you a few steps here or there are actually going to help. It's not going to mean you turn into a UI guy at any point. But there are several things you can do, just like, finding out if testing's going on. You could run a user test yourself after you try one. You don't need other people to do it. A developer can do it on their own. So it's not like if you can't integrate UX, if UX won't come to you, you have to go to the mountains, so to speak. You have to start. Now, what I think we should do because of time is if you don't have UX resources and are looking for things you can do, just hang out with me after, and I'll give you some more practical things you can do, because the slide I'm about to show you is really mean, but it's true. Because I'm a Gen X guy. Okay, when I came out of college, there wasn't even any Google. And we just had to, if we were going to make things or do things, we just had to figure it out. And in the very early days of the internet, no one was as sherry happy as they are now. They were all like, I'm making a shopping cart and I'm not telling you how to make it. I don't want you to get it first. So we just had to work 18-hour days and figure it out. I know that sucks, but the point is there's plenty of people who probably have it worse than you who can press through. So this is my horrible way of being encouraging, you totally can do it, I promise. And I can give you some more uplifting things you could do after we're done. I just suggest you try stuff anyway. Don't ask, it's like asking a bureaucrat for permission. It's just like asking for no. So I learned early on to simply not ask. And occasionally you can get things done, even from my perspective with clients. Sometimes we just don't ask clients and it happens. It's great. It's a weird thing about business. There are people in your organization who do care about this, even if you don't have official UX people. I guarantee you there are. You just got to find them. Most people I talk to, when we give them this advice, they say, I just never thought to ask someone if they cared about the stuff or if they just wanted to do a user test. And people say, yeah, let's do one. And you just get a couple books, you Google a couple things, and you do a user test. You can totally do it. I promise. It would have been a good talk. Would have been, you've decided to do a user test. And maybe next year we'll do that one. Okay. Man, we're kicking butt. 37 minutes in, we're almost done. I have a couple things I want you to remember. Then we'll ask a couple questions, and then I'll hang out, but probably out there if you want to sort of pepper me for things about sort of doing UX on your own. Okay. If you remember just a couple things, I just want you to remember these. Same thing, all right? How someone uses a thing and how it functions, it's the same stuff. You are working on the exact same problem. Nothing different. So you may as well talk together, and you may as well do it together. You absolutely can do this stuff. The stuff that I've talked about here today is really, it shouldn't feel very foreign to you. It's just a matter of making choices. And I realize that if there's managers or leaders who are working against you and they're not helping you, that's a major problem. But there's really nothing stopping you from learning what UX is and how to do it more. There's a zillion books on it. I just showed you one. But there's just so much out there. I mean, we're in a golden age of resources and tools, for crying out loud. A golden age. I can't believe the amount of stuff we have. That you could talk about Unite UX and get me excited in a market already full of tools. That means something. Now, you don't necessarily have to learn everything, right? Because you don't have to, I don't have to be a developer to work closely with, appreciate, and even understand developers. Neither do you have to be a UX pro to do the same. If you have basic fundamental understanding, you can get there. Harder, much harder if you don't have any backup in your organization. I don't mean to downplay that. It's hard as hell. But you can do it. I promise. Okay. if you want some more stuff like this, all you got to do is go find me on Twitter, and I've already tweeted all this stuff. I tweeted out a bunch of stuff that you should read and really enjoy. In fact, I tweeted out something that I really would love for you to read and give me feedback on. It's called The Modern Digital Tragedy. It's the story of Sisyphus and why development teams tend to not be able to make great things. It's all about what we talked about today. I would love your feedback on it. But you might find it helpful, and you can just just send it to one of those leaders who don't want UX, and maybe they'll read it. And then it's all on our blog at TrueMatter. So, okay, and 40 minutes, not bad. Okay. In the back, if you are a person who loves gewgaw and baubles, there are magnets and junk, TrueMatter and buttons. There's also a sign-up sheet for our blog email newsletter. Never, ever, ever will we sell you a damn thing. It's just really good stuff that we want you to read. That's it. It's how to integrate this stuff, how to do it, and lessons we've learned flat. I think you will really enjoy it. And there's a lot of good stuff for developers there. And I think that's it. So ask a question. We had a question?
Sure. And thank you for doing this.
Ask a question, get a shirt. Sorry.
What if I ask two? No. So my question is about psychological safety between UX and devs.
Like safe words? Do we have a...
Safe words, that's right. Safe. But what I mean is all of a sudden you have, a designer who comes and says, I want this masterpiece.
Yeah, and they're wrong, right?
And the dev says, I don't know if I can even tell him that I can't do half of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there's this breakdown of I don't want to know that I can't do this. Or maybe this, because CSS could be a mess sometimes.
Yeah.
And how do you encourage kind of just open dialogue, especially when someone either on the other side.
Yeah. Part of that is process. Okay, so when you're doing early sketching, you can put structure to that. That says, you need a good project leader to keep this structure strong. You're going to say things like, in the first part of this, we're going to throw up every idea that we've got. That's your code for, I know the designer is going to throw up something stupid, right, or whatever. And then there's going to be another set of the stage where now we're going to start judging these things together as a group. We're going to essentially put something behind the best ones, and then we're going to try to test a couple of them. And if you do it that way, and you just try to do some of that quickly, you can weed out some of the bad stuff early. But you have a bigger problem if your designer is still putting forth things that are unworkable. That is, you don't really have a UX person, you have a visual person. They are, I assure you, not necessarily the same thing. Often those things are confused. No, I have, worked with many UX people who couldn't draw a square box to save their lives. So you have a bigger problem where you might not have the right person in that role creating interfaces.
Right, the visual,
straight up.
So visual is different than UX.
No, they can be, there's a part of visual part to UX, and often you'll get UX people who tend to be visual people. You may also get UX people who come from a programming background. You can. But you can get both. You can get UX people who come from a content background. UX is an emerging discipline. It's still gelling, to be quite frank. It's enough to say that UX designer, visual designer, UX person, those are terms that are thrown out. They mean nothing. It's terrible. You're talking about someone who could really define and figure out and talk to users, figure them out, structure something for them. That's really what you want. That person may be visual, maybe not.
Thank you. How do you manage
Oh no, Jordan got it. Okay.
How do you manage, so in order to get the UX required as a developer,
Yeah. Of course.
UX, there's a lot more people involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you manage all the expectations of all these people and come up with a product that the user gets?
All right, that's an awesome question. It's such an awesome question. You could have a whole talk on that alone. So I don't think I cannot do that question justice without us just talking. But I would say the best way, my 30-second answer is, when you're developing a digital product, if you are not bringing along stakeholders, right, at these sets of, time, sprints or whatever you're doing, or even users, you are setting yourself up for a potential problem. Like, hey, here's this thing. And they're like, what is this? Yeah, exactly, right? So by bringing users along or testing more frequently, you're starting to get more empirical evidence. There's nothing like evidence to shut people up. And better if they're there and they never even ask because they watched people use it. So those are the things that I know work. That's my 30-second answer, but that's a very involved answer that really smart people still have trouble with. But if we want to talk, we'll talk. Do we have one more? Are we done?
Is there any tools available to evaluate your existing application? Or when you design a UX, which can be useful, is there any tools available?
The beautiful thing about today, and I can do this. Okay. We're in a golden age of tools. There's so many tools, and they're wonderful. We use Axure, we use Sketch, we use XD. We use documents for requirements. We use collaborative tools with clients to share documents. Some people use Basecamp or use Teamwork or whatever. We're on Slack all the time. Slack changed our lives in terms of, keeping track of things. So I don't have like one great tool. I would say find a tool that you feel efficient in and go. Thank you. So Unite UX, please kill it. I'm telling you that, I got to tell you, that was awesome. Yes. I don't have any more shirts, but I'll answer.
How would you know that it's bad UX design from a video?
If easy, that's actually blissfully easy. You test it. And if the users it's meant for suffer at it and can't do it, it is bad. There are no bad users, I assure you. That's true. Just bad designs. That's true.
Do you have a couple of other ideas of how we the developers can push ourselves into the design process?
Yes.
So far removed.
I know.
It's like,
I would say that a great place to start, sorry about that. Come on over. You can do it. No, you're good. Okay. He's trying to jump over chairs. Okay. A good place to start is with user testing because you can rally around that. So I would read a good book on user testing and invite people to do some testing. Even if the testing you invite them to do doesn't have to do with the job you're working on now, just to prove to them that this thing is interesting and can work. That's a great place to start because you can rally almost anyone around that. And that will at least start a conversation. So if I had to say one place to start, that would be the one place I'd choose. A good book would be Rocket Surgery Made Easy by Krug. That's an intro to user testing. I would try that. Thank you. I think we're done. We could just y'all could go and whatnot. So thanks.